This show is sponsored by Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today is a 12-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, as well as the recipient of the distinguished Peabody Award. He has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, to name a few, traveling to over 80 countries with experience interviewing world leaders and business giants, namely Bill Gates. He offers unique insights and capabilities. His reporting prowess has uncovered deep secrets, exposed unspoken truths, and brought lightheartedness to morning shows. Throughout his journalistic career, he's been a trailblazer, launching online news startups, media databases, and media training in underserved nations. Today, he has taken his experiences, expertise, and his desire to help others succeed in media to a whole other level by founding Media Advisory Expert, where he offers media training, video production, and strategic consulting. He is driven by lifting all boats with the tide and helping leaders like you create the best media profile available. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Media Advisory Expert, Mark Albert.
Michael, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome to the show, man.
It's great to be here.
It's so cool to have you on the show today. We've talked a little bit off air about why, but I go to the Speaker Lab, which is how we met in the Speaker Lab Mastermind. And what I want to share with our listeners here today is you just never know what you're going to get out of a training, out of an organization, out of a mastermind, out of anything in life until you go in and put yourself out there. And why I say this is the mastermind that you and I were a part of that day. So I call them all masterminds. They were workshops or whatever you want to call them. But they're typically these coaching sessions with multiple people on them. And they have different topics that they follow. And in the particular one that you and I met, it was a topic that I had already explored. I had already gone to one of their masterminds before, but I have it marked off on my calendar. And that day I remember thinking, why am I going to it? I have so much to do, and I've already gone through this mastermind. There's not really a need for me to be here. It's mostly for the beginners that are coming. And I always go back to my philosophy of I'm always going to learn something from somewhere. And so I showed up, and sure enough, you were there and you introduced yourself. And something happened. There was some sort of connection that happened between us. I don't remember it specifically, but a connection happened. I reached out to you, and I slid into your DMs, reached out to you and said, hey, I think you'd be great on my podcast. And then from there, we hit it off and had several meetings. And so I go back to why I'm sharing this story with everyone is that you just never know what kind of what lesson you're going to learn or who you're going to meet. And I know why I reached out to you, and it had to do with a lot had to do with your resume, and of course, you know, the Emmy Awards and all that stuff. But really, the journalist side of it. I mean, I run a podcast here, right? So it would make sense that I'm like super enthusiastic about learning about the business. So I just wanted to share that with everyone listening, in that like you just never know what things are going to come about. So you got to take that risk, take that chance, and be open to opportunities.
Absolutely. And in fact, what you were talking about, you were going to Indianapolis, if I recall, and you were thinking about, geez, if I'm going to Indianapolis, how can I get more exposure for your own business and for what you're doing? And I think I just popped up in the middle of the class. And I said, well, if you're going, do this, 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 this. And you were like, oh my gosh. Yes. And then we connected afterwards. I think you were in the car, you were taking notes.
Yes.
And so it was great. I was able to share some knowledge with you, and then you invited me on the podcast, and it's so great to be here.
That's funny. Yeah, that's exactly what, I was looking for help. I went to this beginner's call looking for help. You're right.
That's
That's pretty ironic that I bring it up that way. So yeah, so you're here now, which is really awesome. I always like to thank my guests for traveling and coming here. You have your partner Francisco here with you as well. And you got to visit Poughkeepsie. How amazing!
We had the best pizza in Poughkeepsie, right? It was the Dutch Crown, so the best pizza in the area.
That's awesome. Chris is going to be excited to hear that. He just opened up, new entrepreneur, so that'd be really cool. Let's get into your story. So. As I mentioned, and everybody heard in your bio, you've been on all these different networks. You've been all over the globe, and we're going to talk about that, and of course, all the cool celebrities and politicians and all these people that you've met. I'm interested in your story. How did you get to where you are?
All right, so we have to go back to 1940. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not that old, although I have gray hair for those watching on Facebook Live. So you know what? I wanted to be an English teacher. And I would go to these teacher supply stores, and I would use my allowance, and I would buy a blackboard and chalk, and I would make my sister, who was 4 years younger than me, sit down, and I would, fake teach. And so that's what I thought I was going to do. But I had this AP English teacher who just made it so unenjoyable. I thought, okay, what am I going to do for the rest of my life now if I'm not going to be an English teacher? And my mom said one day, well, you started watching local news when you were 11. You bought the LA Times with your allowance when you were 11. You're on the school newspaper. You anchor the TV production club in high school. Of course, why don't you explore journalism? And it was sort of like, oh yeah, duh. I was the kid who in 1992, the election between George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot, I'm sitting at the TV and I'm counting on a piece of paper the electoral college votes as each state is coming in. And I'd run to my mom and I'd run to my dad and I'd say, Bush is up by this many, Clinton's up by this many, because I wanted to know before anybody else. And I wanted to be able to deliver that history to people, to say, this is what's happening right now. And, as a journalist, you're writing the first draft of history. It's amazing. It's a front seat to history. And I've always been captivated by it. It's been 25 years now, a quarter century. And it is so fulfilling and so honorable, journalism. And I've been so fortunate to be able to travel around the world, like you said, and tell so many amazing stories. I'm just very grateful.
So at 11 years old, you were spending your allowance to buy you mentioned LA. So did you grow up in LA?
Yep. I grew up in Los Angeles, went to USC for college. Go Trojans, everybody.
I had a feeling that I thought that bottle is a USC bottle. Yep. It's a little faded, but
so for those I don't know if you can see it. For those watching on Facebook Live, it's a USC Trojans water bottle. I was in the Trojan marching band playing alto sax. So I grew up in LA and I started using my allowance money to buy the LA Times on Sundays because I wanted to know the news. I wanted to know what was happening. And I would get so mad because my dad would get up before me and he'd go down on the driveway and he'd pick up the LA Times and I'd get up. I'd say, leave it there. I want to pick it up. So, I just was really interested in the news and current events and what was happening at an early age.
Who gave you that spark? Because 11 years old, so you had to find the time somewhere. You had to...
I honestly don't know. It just was all of a sudden I wanted to know what was happening in the world. And in fact, my grandparents on my mother's side, they told each of the grandkids that when you turn 11, you can go anywhere in the country you want. We'll take you on vacation, just the three of us. And so my cousin, who was a year older, she said the Redwood Forest. And I thought, well, how silly is that? I mean, it's in California. You can go there anytime you want. And my sister chose Disney World. And I thought, well, how silly is that? We're in Disneyland's backyard. Why would I want to go there? And when my grandparents asked me where I wanted to go, I knew instantly Washington, D.C. I wanted to see the Constitution. I wanted to go to the Capitol. I wanted to go to the White House. And it just captivated me so much. The monuments, the history, the sleaze, the corruption, all of it in Washington, that I told myself at 11 that if I ever got the chance, I was going to live in D.C. and I was going to work in D.C. And I made that happen.
You told yourself at 11.
Yeah.
On my show, I've had several guests come on, and we talk about manifesting, we talk about visualization, and vision boards, and all these cool things. And some of them work, and some of them don't. But in this case here, did you know what you were doing when you told yourself that? Did you know that what you were doing was kind of like writing your future?
No, I just thought this is a really cool city, and I love the columns and the architecture and all of it. It was amazing, and I always felt home when I would come to D.C. So after that, you go there maybe in high school once, or you go, when you're working, you go to visit friends or something. every time I would go to DC, I felt more home than I did in LA. And you mentioned manifesting, and I said, if I ever got a chance, I'll tell you what, I never did get the chance. I interviewed for a correspondent job at CBS News, and I didn't get the job. This was in 2012. And so I told myself, when my contract comes up, I was in Minneapolis, investigative reporter. I said, when my contract comes up next year, I'm quitting my job, I'm putting everything in storage, and I'm moving to DC without a job or a place to live, and I'm going to work for CBS News. And so I moved to Washington, D.C., and a friend said I could sleep in his extra bedroom, and I would find out where the bureau chief was going to be for CBS News, because I already knew him. I interviewed with him. So if he was at a charity event at the museum or somewhere else, I would show up. And I would say, what a coincidence. I'm here now. Great to see you. And after a couple of times, he's like, okay, just come by the office and we'll talk. And that turned into a wonderful 3 years at CBS News, reporting for the CBS Evening News, CBS This Morning. I reported across the country. I reported from Taiwan, Australia, Peru. It was amazing. But like you just said, sometimes you have to realize what you want, and you have to put it all on the line, and you have to go make it happen.
Yeah, I think that's a really great message for everybody to hear. I go back to the 11-year-old, and your parents have this, your grandparents are going to take you all on trips. By the way, Redwood Forest, I'm from New York, and that is on our family's bucket list, is to go visit the Redwood Forest.
It's amazing.
It's not in our backyard, but you're so right on the point that we take for granted the things that are in our backyard. Like for me, growing up, I grew up in Queens, New York, so right near Manhattan. Growing up there, going to see the Statue of Liberty or the World Trade Center or the Empire State Building, the only time I really went to do that was if we had relatives coming from outside of the country. I'm so grateful that my cousins from France, when I was, I believe, 17 years old, I'm so grateful that they were like, no matter what we do, we want to visit the World Trade Center. And I'm so grateful for that because I would have never visited it. Right. I have a picture at the top of the World Trade Center because of them. Not because I lived in New York, because they came from France to drag me to go see the World Trade Center. It's incredible, but you're right, we take it for granted. But to your point, we want to see what's on the other side. And you wanted to go to D.C., and I'm kind of just putting some pieces together here of you putting the votes together in 1992 and, Ross Perot and George Bush, which, by the way, I remember that election. I remember that election because I was in fifth grade, I think. Was I in fifth grade? I think I was in fifth grade during that election. And our class did a whole thing on it, on voting. We did a whole voting thing on it. And I remember at the time not understanding politics, but understanding wealth. And I remember hearing Ross Perot was a billionaire or a big millionaire at the time. I guess at the time billionaires weren't that big. And a lot of us in the class kind of rallied around him because we were like, this is so cool. Like we want a rich guy running the country. I don't know why we thought that would make sense. Looking back at it today.
And now you're a billionaire too, right?
Yeah. On how strange that is. But I remember that. And I go back to you in this story in that you're 11 years old, you're buying the LA Times, you're kind of doing your own thing, but you're focused around politics. And, in my research of you and checking out some of the stories that you've done and your demo reel and all the different things, it is around politics. And I think, back to what your dream of manifesting being in D.C., of course, you live there now, and seeing it kind of like closes in on this cool shot that comes in and you're standing in front of some big building in D.C. Pardon me for not knowing
the U.S. Capitol. I'm there. I'm the Supreme Court. Yep.
My listeners are just like, all right, Michael, you got to get some geography in you, man. But I'm just tying it all together to what was this draw for you of politics? Because this started at a very young age. And you've carried that throughout your career.
I think it's that's where the magic happens. What happens in D.C., as jaded as so many of your listeners probably are, what happens in D.C. affects everybody. It affects your taxes. It affects your health care. It affects your rights to own and buy and bear arms. It affects everything. And so the opportunity to be at the center of power where decisions are made that will spread out to affect the rest of the country, that was intoxicating. That was alluring and attractive, and to be able to tell people about something that just happened that's going to affect their lives. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will affect their lives. That was so seductive. And as I mentioned earlier, as a journalist, you're helping to write the first draft of history. And so just like that kid in 1992 who wanted to tell his parents before they could hear it on the news who was ahead in the electoral college count, I wanted to tell the first draft of history. And where better to do that than in Washington, D.C.?
That's interesting. It's definitely a whole different take from what I'm, I guess, used to in terms of interviewing business owners and entrepreneurs and more of the CEOs of companies, which you are one, because their take is usually around going to where the business hubs are, or the tech hub, or Silicon Valley. You know, I've had a few of those on the show, and those were pretty neat, where it's like a rocket ship, and they're talking about the big rush that happened with the tech industry at the time. So it's just such a different turn, which is very interesting. So you have this desire at 11 years old. You're doing all this stuff. But then obviously you go off to school and you want to be an English teacher. Tell us a little bit more about that, because it also ties to what you're doing today.
Well,
the teaching thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I wanted to be an English teacher, but I kind of got the joy sucked out of me in high school. And so my senior year, the fall of my senior year, USC in our backyard, University of Southern California, they held a prospective freshman orientation. So, if you're a high school senior, you're thinking about applying, you can come to the university with your parents and you take 3 one-hour sessions. And so my mom and I went, and I signed up for English 1 hour and education the next hour. And I needed to fill the third hour. And I turned to my mom and I said, what else should I take? And she goes, well, of course, journalism. She recapped everything I had been doing. So I said, okay. Went to education, went to the English sessions, and I was like bored. And so we get to the last session of the day, and it was on journalism. And they had former USC students who were now reporters and producers and anchors. And they were standing up there. I can just see it so clearly in my head. They were standing up there and they were talking about what they do and what journalism has brought to their life. And at the end, I turned to my mom and I said, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that was it. You had to apply to USC. And just because you got into USC didn't mean you get into the journalism school. So I had to apply there, and I got in, and I never, ever considered changing my major. That was it. I was inspired by that orientation session. I used everything I had learned at 11 and in high school, and that was just the track for me. And so now it's been 25 years and 29 years. Wait, that would have been 90. I'm dating myself here. It'll be 30 years this fall since I took that orientation. What's the allure of the TV aspect of it? Because you could have been a reporter writing for the LA Times or the New York Times or the Washington Post. I think is bigger than any Times over there, right? I don't know. The Washington Post is huge. Right? The New York Times, absolutely. Those are all flagship newspapers in America.
You could have been writing for them. You could have done the same journalistic type of things that you do of interviewing people and bringing that back to the office and writing it all up and typing it all up and doing all that stuff. So what about television or the cameras was alluring to you?
It's kind of like asking somebody who performs for Cirque du Soleil, why are you high up 100 feet on this thin little string instead of walking in the crosswalk on the ground? Because it's the excitement, it's the allure, it's the medium. And so being live on broadcast television is being on that high wire act. You are live. A newspaper reporter is so invaluable to our medium, but it's a different type of presentation. I loved the excitement, the adrenaline rush of saying something over the air and it going out to everybody, and you can't take it back. You can't hit the delete key. You can't change the wording of that phrase. Just like if you publish it in the newspaper, once it hits the print, it's gone. But to be on live television when there is breaking news, when things are happening, history is being made, it is so alluring and such a high. To be able to do that high wire act, and I have found it just so absolutely intriguing. It's breaking a story live on television is an amazing feeling.
I could only imagine that, because I asked this question also because of myself, right? I think of it, I don't know how to answer the question personally of when someone asks me, like, what do you want to do? And I say public speaking, and I talk about giving keynotes. I talk about wanting to start my own show, my own television broadcast type of show. And when the question comes up, why, I don't really have an answer for it other than I just really enjoy it. Something about, to your point, the cameras being on and being in front of the camera and knowing that you're reaching so many people, there's a feeling, right?
It's an immediacy. It's an immediacy.
Yeah.
What you're doing is having an immediate effect. And for you, I think it goes back as well to teaching. When you speak, you are conveying this information, this thought process. You are teaching your audience something. And I think that's a real allure to both of us, is to be able to communicate immediately to your audience something that you find of value, that you think is going to impact their lives.
Yeah. It's probably the immediacy of the impact, and then I think in terms of the broadcast area aspect of it, it's the knowledge that so many people have availability to watch it. I'm not there yet in followers, but the availability. I'm with you on the live piece because mine is much smaller than yours in terms of a CBS or an NBC or something like that having breaking news and live. But I do an Instagram live, and now it's a LinkedIn live show, and it's live. It's live, and my guests will sometimes be a little nervous or concerned or anything, and I'm just like, don't worry about it. It's all good. It's all fun. And there's something about it, to your point, when we hit that live button that just feels like, all right, I'm on. Like, and my last guest, which was actually yesterday, my most recent guest, I should say, which was yesterday, she said that to me. She goes, at the end, when we finished recording or doing the live, it was a live, she was just like, it was so interesting to see you go from just talking with me to all of a sudden your energy just went through the roof. And there's something about hitting that live button where I'm just like a sprinter. Like it just goes, right? It's wild.
Well, you're trying to tell a story. And so for your listeners right now who are listening to this podcast a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, we need to convey with our voice and enunciation and emotion what we are hoping that they will take away from this. So you have to pump up the energy. It's radio, it's television, right? We are not in your living room, but we are in a sense, a 2D version.
Yeah, we've got to bring that excitement. I want to go into your journalistic background because you have a lot to cover here. I mean, I had written down 7-time Emmy, and it's actually 12, so I'm interested in understanding what it takes to get an Emmy. I think that everybody, the reason why it's in the first 2 sentences of my intro to you is because I think there's a big allure to that too, of like, whoa, 7 Emmys, what was 12 Emmys? Who is this guy? How did Michael get him on the show? So I'm interested in what is it about an Emmy? How do you get one? How did you receive yours? What were some of the things that you did? We're going to get to the Peabody one, but I'm interested in the Emmys for now.
Sure. It's interesting because in broadcast journalism, the Peabody is much more prestigious than the Emmys.
And that's why I said we're going to get to it, because there's a reason behind the Peabody for you that there's a much deeper story there that I want us to dig into. Yeah.
So the Emmys, basically when you do a story in news, and most of my Emmys were from my work in Michigan and in Minneapolis, they're for different stories. And so one Emmy was for team coverage on the I-35W bridge collapse that happened in August of 2007.
Oh my goodness,
I was the second news crew on there. One of them is for my embedding with U.S. troops in Iraq. I did it twice. And another one is a story we did about manufacturing jobs going from the U.S. to Mexico in the early 2000s. And so it's for different stories and different journalism. I was very, very honored to win those with my peers, and it's.
What's some of the criteria in order to be recognized that way?
So typically, you'll enter the Emmys and you enter the stories, an explanation of why it made a difference, and then your peers judge you for whether it's your region or it's nationally or it's different markets. And so these were for, I think it was the Midwest, ones or something. Michigan and Minneapolis. So it would have been like the Midwest of the country. And you don't find out for months. And then you go to the ceremony and you get the Emmy that you see on TV. You get that statuette. Now, news Emmys are different than TV Emmys. So I'm not winning against Grey's Anatomy.
Right. No, of course. Yes.
These are news Emmys.
Yes, I figured. And what kind of impact does it do on your career? Does it have on your career when you win them?
Obviously, people bring it up like you, and so it's a big impact. And obviously, the awards that you win that are voted on by your peers are really an incredible honor.
Mm-hmm. So let's get to the Peabody, because when I first was doing some research on you, and of course the Emmys were the first thing, because that's the part that's the one that we're all really familiar with. I remember actually telling my mom that I was going to have you on the show. Yeah, I'm telling you, it's pretty cool. Like I said, you're in an industry that I've always wanted to be a part of. And so it's kind of like It's kind of like how I always wanted to be in the NBA if I had LeBron James sitting here with me, right? So I put you on that level.
Oh my goodness.
So I was talking with my mom about when I first met you, and I said, I think he's going to come on the podcast. And I said, yeah, he's an Emmy Award winning journalist. And I said, and he's got this Peabody. I don't know what it means, but he's got a Peabody. And then I did a little looking up on it. I don't have as much background as I'd like, and I'd like you to share with it. But my understanding is it had to do with something that you uncovered in the U.S. military, and that was really significant and really impactful. And that this Peabody Award is not something that just anybody receives. That it's not this. It really is a distinguished award. And if you could share maybe a little context to it, and then how you were able to earn it.
So the Peabody Award is the Pulitzer Prize of broadcast journalism. If you're a broadcast journalist, you cannot enter the Pulitzer Prizes. Those are for print and online. And so it's an incredible honor. And what happened is, and I'm actually getting chills thinking about this as I'm about to explain it. In 2004, on September 11th, 2004, there was a Minnesota sailor. He was a corpsman assigned to Marines in Iraq. And he died around 2 a.m. on September 11th, 2004, at a base in Iskandariyah, Iraq. And the Marines found him dead in the shower. And the Pentagon told his family, the Cedergren family, that he died of an undiagnosed heart ailment. Well, his father used to be a medical examiner, and the sister was a nurse. And they're like, okay, we're all getting tested for this heart ailment. Nobody had it. 4 years later, in 2008, the Pentagon announces that about 12.5 cases, deaths, of U.S. service members abroad in the previous 4 years were going to be reopened. And Dave Cedergren was one of them. So that night, I and a photographer from KSTP Television, the ABC affiliate in Minneapolis, drove to Dave Cedergren's father's house. And we interviewed him for a 1-30-second story on the evening news, 11 p.m. news. And I remember driving back with a photographer and saying, I can't believe that 4 years later, this family does not know for sure how their loved one died. And I want to get to the bottom of it. So we did the story that night, and I filed what's called a Freedom of Information Act request, FOIA request. This is the landmark public records law in the U.S. You don't have to be a journalist to use it. Any one of your listeners can file a FOIA. And essentially, it demands that the government give them access to public records. So I filed one with the Pentagon and NCIS for the investigative file on Dave Cedergren's death. And after several months, our request was denied. So we got our lawyers involved, and we appealed, and we fought it over and over again. And after 6 months, we got the file. And Michael, it was about 3 inches thick. And what it showed is that there were so many electrical problems at the base where Dave Cedergren died that when it rained, sparks would jump up from the ground from the exposed wiring, that other Marines had been burned and shocked and hurt in those very showers where they found Dave Cedergren dead. Hurt so badly, some had to be flown out to Ramstein Air Base in Germany for extensive treatment. And the base commanders knew that these problems existed. And when they went to go fix it, they didn't ask for a certified electrician from the U.S. They didn't ask for the Seabees at the Navy to fix it conclusively. Instead, they looked for a local electrician. And when asked by the investigator, how did you determine what electrician to bring on? They said, we looked for the oldest Iraqi because we figured if they live that long, they must know what they're doing. And that's who they got to fix the base where Dave Cedergren died. They did not fix that base. They did not fix the electrical problems. Dave Cedergren's father gave me power of attorney to get the autopsy photos, and they showed electrical burns on his fingers and his toes. And after we pressed and pressed and pressed, they amended the cause of death to electrocution in that shower. We did 3 parts of the series. We gave the family the documents that they were not able to get after they had hired several lawyers. And we pressed NCIS for an interview, and they declined. After the 3rd piece that we aired, the PIO, Public Information Officer for the NCIS, called and they said, okay, the head of NCIS will do an interview with you on camera. You have to come to D.C., and if you come here, just know she's not going to apologize for what happened, for the investigation, for not telling the family, for missing the signs. And I said, no problem, we're going to go anyway. And I prepared Michael for that interview like I had never prepared in my life. And I had so many documents with me. And we set up multiple cameras. We're at NCIS headquarters in Washington. And 5 minutes into the interview, as I'm pressing the head of NCIS investigations into what happened, she says, you know what? I have a son, and my son's serving in Iraq right now. And if this happened to my son, I would want someone to apologize. So on behalf of us here at NCIS, I apologize for what happened.
Wow.
After our series ran, the Armed Forces Medical Examiner changed the way that the U.S. tracks the remains of every service member killed around the world. That is the power of journalism, and those are the answers we got for this family that they would not have had otherwise. Later this year, it's 2024 as we're talking. Later this year will be the 20th anniversary of Dave Cedergren's death. And I hope that the military has learned something and prevented other families from going through this grief.
Thank you very much for sharing that entire story, actually. It definitely feels, I felt chills from it, from you sharing it, and it's very deep. So because of this, you then were awarded with this Peabody Award. And I think from what I get from you sharing the story, is it's really the award was almost second to the feelings of even getting her to apologize.
It's the power of journalism to hold the powerful to account. You cannot have a democracy without journalism. You cannot have a democracy without a free press. In fact, as I love to say, Thomas Jefferson has a very famous quote, and he said in 1787, 2 years before the ratification of the Constitution, were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. Thomas Jefferson preferred newspapers and a free press to a government. That should tell you all you need to know.
Just wanted to set this up because I just realized that this would be probably better than that camera over there.
For the audience, Michael here is playing studio technician and host all at the same time.
All at the same time. While you were reading that, I was just like, maybe I could get this going for us at some weird angle of my water cup here.
This is how it's done, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm thinking I'm going to have to delete this part of the podcast for a second, but we're going to get right back into it. That's not working out so great.
Can you just angle the laptop? Not the phone, but the laptop. No, angle it, twist it like this. Yeah. Now prop the camera up again, maybe.
That works. And we're at 52 minutes to delete that part. We'll take it back up here. I have a few questions for you in terms of this story. There's one of the things that we're going to talk about for sure, and I'm going to get to, is how you prepare for interviews. Because you mentioned that you prepared like you never did before in your life. And this definitely is something that I would like to know about, if I can get some insider tips. But I want to go back to some of this case here that happened. As a journalist, you have a job to do, and the job seems simple from an outsider's perspective. It's, this happened, go interview that person, take some pictures, get some video, get some good audio, whatever it is, and bring it back to our desks, and we'll build a story around it. But for some reason, on your drive back, you had this inclination to uncover more. I'm curious about that inclination that you had. What, not necessarily about this story, because I just feel like it's something that trends with you, of you always have this like desire for deeper knowledge. And I'm curious as to what that is and where it comes from.
Well, that's a great question. I think part of it is, and on this story specifically, I can't stand when people lie to me. I'm offended. And I'm offended when people in power and responsibility hide information from the public. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant, which is a very famous saying. And I'm offended when people try to cover things up and they try to hide the truth and they don't tell the truth. And our job is to get to the best ascertainable version of the truth. Not the total truth, the best ascertainable version of the truth at that moment. And the fact that this family did not know after 4 years conclusively how their loved one died, and the fact that the Pentagon refused to give the file to the family, refused to tell them what happened, and even refused to tell them who found their son's body. The name of the person who found Dave Cedergren's body in the shower was redacted in the report. We found him. We flew him to Minneapolis and reunited him with the family at the gravesite, at Dave Cedergren's gravesite. The Pentagon kept the name from the family. And I just am offended when people try to conceal the truth.
When all of this is happening, and I appreciate what you're saying too in terms of concealing the truth, and it's really obnoxious when someone, you know that they're lying and they don't want to tell the truth. I want to stay on track though with this story here because again, there's a lot of questions here, but I don't want this to be our entire conversation today. But it really is. It goes very deep, and it also ties back to your I think your interest in politics, interest in being interesting to be a journalist on. When you had to get the lawyers to open this up, was that when you and your team kind of knew, oh, okay, we're on to something here? Because I just feel like by them not giving you the information that you have the right to was almost kind of like a red flag, like something's up here.
The file should have been given to the family, and if the file had been given to the family, there would be very little for us to look into. And so when they denied it,
you knew something was up.
The government does not deny access to a file because there's nothing in the file except for daisies. Right? There is something in there. And it was so explosive. The day I got the file, actually, it was a big box, and I opened it up at the station at my desk. And I think I read about maybe 5 pages, and I went straight to my news director's office. And I said, you are not going to believe what's in these documents. I mean, we had to pay, I think, $100 or something. I could not believe it. The how they found the electrician, the oldest Iraqi, and the sparks coming up from the ground, and all of this stuff. My blood was boiling, and I could not wait to do the story. But then, of course, you have to get all of your ducks in a row.
Sure.
You have to go all these interviews together. We brought the entire family into the studio. We took our time. We tried to reach people that were there at the time, and it was a very laborious process, but it paid off for this family.
And I ask this too because why did they need to hide it? I mean, from my ignorant perspective, is that we set up a base in a foreign country, and we don't have the resources available to us to get the proper electricity going through there. And we have people in power who made some mistakes. And I feel like there's some reasonable answers to a lot of it, which aren't answers that we want as family members of anybody who dies or gets burned or is injured, but is something to where we can say, okay, we get it. You're abroad. You're in a battle. You're at war. There's people around you. I thought maybe it was because a Taliban was trying to get into, and that's how the electric thing. When you mentioned that they were getting Iraqis, and there's all sorts of reasons that could have at least made us feel like, okay, I get it. Why do you think it was important, I guess, to the Pentagon to hide this?
I have no idea. I don't know whether it was embarrassment or it was, I have no idea. I can't get into their head. All I know is that they did not disclose it to the family. They denied our Freedom of Information Act request. We had to appeal. We finally got it on appeal. And what it showed was damning. It was absolutely damning. And if it had not been for journalism, this family would not have answers today.
Yeah. I mean, and when you think about journalism, I just watched a movie, not a journalistic movie, but a documentary type movie on. Do you remember? It didn't happen that long ago. When I can't remember the names of the people, but I think there was a group called the Wall Street something, and they drove the GameStop stock really high.
Yeah.
So I just watched that movie, and where I'm relating this whole thing is that in the end there was a bunch of different things that happened from a UCC or not UCC financial, I think it was
SEC.
SEC, thank you.
Securities and Exchange Commission.
Yes, a bunch of things that happened, and where people really probably should have gone away or been fined a lot heavily, right? Heavier. I don't know what should have happened or didn't happen, but I know what didn't happen, right? And it was that they didn't. And do you know anything about the story?
I don't know much.
Oh, you don't know much? Okay,
No.
so just to kind of give you a little background so you could understand what I'm talking about here. This guy who's a financial analyst starts going on live camera and starts talking about his stock portfolio. And he starts saying GameStop is going to be the next hottest stock, and I'm doubling down on it. And in the movie, I'm just referencing the movie here. In the movie, and I'm assuming a lot of this is true because it was all done on live streaming platforms. He invests like $50,000 into GameStop, and at the time the stock was like $3 and change. And now other people start jumping on the bandwagon, and they start driving the stock up. At the same time, hedge fund managers were shorting the stock. And now that the stock's going high, they're losing millions into billions of dollars.
The ultimate meme stock, right?
Yes. So this is what's happening. This guy's 50 grand gets turned into, at the end of the whole story, 30 million, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how high he drove the stock. It drove up to over $384 from what I remember. So anyway, what ended up happening was they were buying the stock through an app called Robinhood.
Yeah.
A lot of them were buying it through Robinhood. And the founders of Robinhood were saying, free platform and, you can buy stocks and all this other stuff. And one of the hedge funds that were involved were also involved with Robinhood, I guess, in some way. I don't know how. But somehow or another, at least in the movie, the way that they described it, the app got turned off. The buy button on the app or the sell button on the app got turned off on Robinhood. And therefore, people couldn't buy or sell their stock. And now it was driving the stock down. So there was a whole thing that happened there, and then they fix it because I guess they're trying to get out of the light. It gets fixed or whatever, but then there's a whole court hearing about this, and it puts these hedge fund managers on trial and Robinhood on trial and everything. And in the end, what ends up happening and what's written on the screen, not played out in the story, is that the hedge fund manager walks away, and everybody walks away even though it was proven through text messages and all these other things that they were involved in the shutting down of Robinhood because they were losing billions, right? So where I bring this up in terms of journalism is they got away with it. But if it wasn't for whatever journalism got put into this movie and being, then we would never know that this kind of stuff is happening. We would never know that these people get away with certain things that the normal person doesn't get away with. And even though justice wasn't brought to them in the court, I feel like there's some sort of social justice that occurs in that we can go, you know what? Yeah, I guess they got it walked away with, and we could be angry about it and upset, but we could also look at it and go, at least we know the story. At least we know what happened. And this guy who was painted in a negative light of investing his money, and they were trying to bring him down of saying that he, insider trading and all this other stuff, is like, no, just a normal guy who just likes the stock and bought into it, So I feel like going back to this whole thing of journalism is that you're sharing with all of us two sides of the story, and you're giving us justice to some extent is what I'm feeling.
Let me put it this way. As I said earlier, democracy does not exist without a free press. Since 2000, a quarter of the newspapers in this country have closed. There are now about 200 U.S. counties that are considered news deserts. They have 0 independent news outlets, none, where people get their information from Facebook or other social media, where there is no independent journalism. If you value the GameStop story, if you value the story that we did to find the truth about Dave Cedergren's death, if you value transparency, if you value democracy, you will subscribe to your local journalism outlets. I subscribe to Buffalo News. I don't live in Buffalo, but I admire their journalism. I subscribe to the Arizona Republic. I've never lived in Arizona, but I admire their journalism. If you support stories and journalism and a free press, you should go online today and support your local journalism outlet. They are closing. They are dying. We have had the last 2 months a brutal series of layoffs in journalism. We cannot survive in this current revenue model. It is not enough to talk about it. It is not enough to give out awards. If you and anyone listening supports journalism, then you need to put your money where your mouth is and support democracy.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to just uncovering these stories. I mean, yours obviously definitely different level, different of what was happening there. Another achievement that you received that I'm interested in understanding is the Wade H. McCree Excellence in Legal Journalism. And I'm interested in what that is because it also mentions something about the state bar. So I'm assuming it has to do with law. Are you a lawyer?
I'm not a lawyer. And I think it's so Wade H. McCree was a Solicitor General of the United States. I think he was the first or second African-American Solicitor General of the United States. And it's the Excellence in Legal Journalism and the Advancement of Justice Award. Now, I don't know many people that have an award for the advancement of justice, but I'm very proud of it. And what happened is I was doing journalism about the story of this judge. This judge crashed his car into a building. And what happened from then on was so confusing that we got to the bottom of it and we exposed what really happened. Not what was the first initial story, but what really happened. And as a result of all of our journalism into what happened when the judge crashed his car into this building, we won this award from the Michigan Bar, the Bar Association of Michigan.
So what really happened? Now I'm curious. Now I want to know, what did they tell us and what happened?
Well, this was a while ago, so my memory is a little fuzzy here. And I
just told you a GameStop movie.
Yes. Right.
Sorry, everyone, for that one.
So essentially, the judge crashed his car into this building, and what he said happened was not ultimately what happened. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. I was subpoenaed to testify, which is a big no-no as a journalist. And so our lawyers at the time fought that, and I did not have to testify. But we conclusively showed over a series of months that what the story that was initially told was not true. And it led to a bunch of consequences, went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the fact that we did not back down, that this was a local judge, and it was a smaller county. So in this county, this judge was a very, very big deal. It's not like in a major county where you could have 50 judges.
Right.
I think there was 1 or 2 judges in this county. I can't remember. But again,
where they kind of make their own law.
Where they have a lot of discretion, and it's their fiefdom. And in this case, again, I could not stand that I thought somebody was not telling the truth.
Yeah. So that's where that one came from. Going back to the whole independent journalism, and then of course we have the big ones that are out there. When you're working in the field in this industry, right? You're working in this industry and you're coming up against the Foxes and Wall Street Journal was just bought by Amazon, right? Jeff Bezos owns the
Washington Post.
This
happened
Post,
about 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. I mean, when you see it that way, and we go back to independent, where do you see the landscape of the independent going? When you just mentioned it earlier, of like, are they getting bought up or are they getting kind of like sucked dry? And how does it affect the kind of news that we receive? Because you just talked about like how one thing was said and now it was actually uncovered that it wasn't. So how does it affect that?
Okay, so a clear distinction here. Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post from the Graham family. The Graham family had owned it, I think, for like 70 years. Obviously, the Washington Post did the trailblazing journalism that led to President Nixon resigning, Woodward and Bernstein, obviously. And he bought the paper, but crucially, even though Jeff Bezos bought the paper, he left the editorial team. He left the team, the editor, the managing editors. That team was left to cover the news independently. Jeff Bezos is not sitting in the editorial meeting every day saying, I want you to cover Amazon. In fact, if you look at the Washington Post's history of stories, they've covered Amazon very critically in what's been going on and labor practices and a lot of things there. So it's not, in some ways, billionaires and millionaires buying journalism is saving those outlets. When Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, he gave them a far longer runway and investment into digital products, reporters, new beats, et cetera, new bureaus. And so he gave the Washington Post a lifeline to expand that it would not have had otherwise. So it's not that people buying papers are ruining the journalism. It's, are they keeping the independent structure in that newsroom? That's what's crucial. And by and large, that is what is happening. What's not happening is enough people are not subscribing. Why? They think they can get their news from Facebook. Getting your news from Facebook is not getting the news. You need independent journalism curated with context and analysis with people who have done this, who subscribe to ethics and rules and standards to tell us what is going on in the world. You don't have to agree with everything, but whether you agree or not, these are the facts. And we need people to tell us the facts in our life. We cannot be an informed citizenry if we do not have journalists to tell us what is happening and to put it into context. Journalists are not the enemy of the people. You know what the enemy of the people is? People that don't tell the truth. People that want to shut up journalists. Authoritarians and autocrats, they ruin countries and societies by attacking independent media. That's how they start the slide to dictatorship and authoritarianism. In fact, my favorite person, Thomas Jefferson, 2 years later in 1799, talked about the essential nature of independent journalism, and I actually have this quote on my desk. Our citizens may be deceived for a while and have been deceived, but as long as the presses can be protected, we may trust to them for light. As long as independent journalism can be protected, we can trust journalists to shine a light on corruption and wrongdoing and malfeasance. Support your local journalism.
And I assume that because of that is why you couldn't be subpoenaed for this other thing, because that protects you as a journalist to be able to go and kind of get stories and do the different things that you do.
Well, I was subpoenaed, but we successfully quashed the subpoena because there is a standard in this country that typically reporters are not pressed to testify. Not always, but typically there is that privilege, that standard. It's not ironclad.
And it's to protect the freedom of journalism then.
Sure. If I have a source, let's just talk about, I'm blanking now, the Daniel Ellsberg. He linked the Vietnam War documents from the Pentagon, super secret, and they conclusively showed that our leaders at the time of the Vietnam War were telling us everything was hunky-dory and going great, but they had this whole report to show that they knew things were not going well. They knew things were not going well and that it would ultimately likely end in defeat. Daniel Ellsberg was a contractor at the time, I think for the Rand Corporation. He leaked those to the New York Times. They wanted to uncover the source, the government, and they wanted to shut down the free press. It's called prior restraint, where you try to get an order from a judge to stop journalists from publishing. And in the end, they lost, because even though the New York Times for a short period of time was precluded from publishing, the Washington Post picked up the baton, and then other news organizations picked up the baton. We have a strong history in this country of an independent press, and we will all be worse off if it withers.
So there's a camaraderie between all of them, even if they disagree with each other's views, because some carry different political views or different views on things, right? That's what I've always understood is that, you know, one media outlet goes to the right and one media outlet goes to the left, kind of thing. But in the end, in order to uphold what you're talking about, they all kind of come together.
There's nothing better than beating another journalist at a scoop. However, when the stakes are massive, we all are on the side of truth.
Yeah.
And I would just say one thing that you mentioned, there is partisan media more than ever before, on the left, on the right, on other sides. But a typical news operation has a news side and an editorial side. Let's take the Washington Post. There is a firewall between the newsroom and the editorial pages. One does not control the other. So while you may think that the editorials in the Washington Post lean one way, the newsroom is separate and not a part of that. They are in no way connected to the opinion columnists. Same on cable news. If you have a news operation from 9 to 5 o'clock and at 5 p.m. it switches over to hosts and guest panelists and talk shows, that's different than the news blocks of
what they're reporting.
Yeah.
Going back to this leak that you were just talking about, it made me think about Snowden. I'm interested in your thoughts on that one and how that came up and came about.
Look, a journalist wants to get almost everything out into the open. And so what Edward Snowden did in leaking the fact that there was this warrantless surveillance program that was going on, I think started under the George W. Bush administration, and then he revealed it. Of course, a journalist wants to tell the American public what is going on in their name that they don't know about. There is occasionally times when a journalist will have a story and someone from the administration or Homeland Security or whatnot will ask them to hold the story, not necessarily to kill it, but to hold it for a short period of time so that sources and methods can be protected, or because they feel that if a journalist publishes a story, that it could put lives in danger. There are many, many instances of journalism outlets holding a story for a short amount of time. And I think that what happened in the Snowden case was when they had those documents, if I recall correctly, they did first tell the government that they were going to run these documents, and they asked for comment and quotes and context. And so that's the way to responsibly do it as a journalist, not to post everything online without redactions, but to put it in context, give the government agencies an opportunity to respond, and then report the news.
Thanks for touching base on that. That was another movie that I watched. Another great source of my knowledge here are movies. Going back to the work that you do, which of course we're talking about, but talking about from these other levels and cases and different things that you've reported on, I'm interested in the backdrop of the work that you do. So you've gone to underserved countries and you're teaching these journalists there how to do what you've just talked about, but you're also showing them lighting techniques and video techniques and production techniques and all these other things. I'm interested in some of that too, because we want to go back to you being an English teacher, right? We're going to go back to there, right? And it's not about you being an English teacher, but it's about this desire to teach. And we just had a nice little interaction with one of the people here in the studio, Chris Marino, and you were just talking with him off air here, and just mentioning to him that your greatest joy out of teaching is really selfish, because it's really when you see the light bulb go off that you feel, wow, that's awesome, and you feel this really sense of accomplishment. And so I would love if you could share a little bit about how you go to these different underserved countries, and I know Vietnam is one of the ones that you work closely with, and how you teach them and some of the techniques and strategies that you teach them.
Well, before I talk about me, which I'm always happy to do, let me just give a shout out to the teachers that made the difference in my life. John Starsick was my 5th and 6th grade teacher. He just turned 90 years old. And every year for the last 20 years, I go back to Los Angeles and I take him to lunch because he made such a difference on my life. And you need to tell a teacher when they've made a difference in your life. And in the very beginning, he would say to me, okay, we're going to alternate. You buy lunch one year, I'll buy lunch the next year. And every year he asks me, who bought last year? And I'll tell him that he did, even though he hasn't bought a lunch in 20 years. That's how much of a difference he made to me. And the other one is Carolyn Sweeney. And she was a high school teacher, and she believed in me. She encouraged me, and she believed in me. And so let's have a shout out for teachers. And so if I can even be a quarter of as impactful as they were in my life to other people, then I will have gone full circle and done something that I'm proud of. And so I started teaching in 2016 in Pakistan, actually. The U.S. State Department funded a program through the International Center for Journalists, and they were looking for someone to create a 2-week news production course, everything from how to do a news conference to how to shoot something on camera and how to light it and edit it and put it together. So I put together the course, and I went to Pakistan and taught for 2 weeks. I'm still in touch with those students today, those journalists, and we had to take a different route to the school every day, the classroom, for security concerns. So it was dangerous, but it was important that I go, and it was important that we do that. And they had real desire to transform the Wild West of journalism in Pakistan at that time to the Western model, where there are ethics and rules and standards. And so I did that, and then in 2017, I was invited to go to Vietnam and teach in newsrooms there, and I've done it almost every year since 2017. They'll give me a topic, so last year was fact-checking, and I'll build a 3 to 5 day course on that, and I go and I teach it throughout newsrooms there. I was an adjunct professor at Northwestern University, adjunct lecturer for their Medill School of Journalism. And so now the way we met is, I'm teaching people on media training through my company, Media Advisory Experts. And I teach media training, and I teach crisis communications to clients and video production. And you're right. I guess it goes back to when I was 11. I really, it is selfish. It absolutely is selfish that I find such joy and I get such a kick out of seeing the light bulb go off in someone's head with the curriculum that I've designed, that I've taught them. It's amazing. And you see the impact on these people. They message you years later, the impact that you've had in their life. And so my hat's off to teachers. Thank you to the ones that impacted me. And I tip my cap to all the teachers out there.
I think it goes to the public speaking side of what we do. in the impact side, the impact, right? When you create impact, like why do we do what we do? Why do we do anything? Why does anybody do anything? Why does a mechanic fix a car? Why does anybody do anything? And it's to impact someone. Sometimes it's just for a paycheck, and I get that, right? There's people that job hop, and it's just for a paycheck. I honestly think that a lot of those people who job hop is because they haven't found their reason or what they want to impact or how they want to impact, and they're still searching. And I hope that they'll find their place. But for the people that really find a profession and buckle down and excel in it and look for all different ways and mentors and ways to succeed in that profession, it's the impact that it creates. If you're the best mechanic out there, you're creating an impact. You're keeping roads safe. You're getting people making their cars faster or better or running more efficient or whatever it is, or developing new technologies all sorts of amazing things. So there's always a way to impact. And I want to just also acknowledge teachers, especially since I'm married to one. and my mother was a teacher. She's retired, and so many others who have impacted my life. And so I also want to acknowledge that statement that you made and appreciate it.
My dad told my sister and I when we were kids that he didn't like his job. And he hated his job for 35 years. And he did it to provide for us, right, as a single income family. And he told my sister and I, go find something you love and do it. And I've quit my job 3 times in my career because I wanted to do something more, because I had felt fulfilled and I felt complete. But then at a certain time, you feel like you want to do something more. You want to go chase that joy in a different direction. And I would just say to people out there, some people are not able to always chase the joy. And if you have the capability, if you have that moment in time, no matter how brief it may be, chase the joy.
I love that, chase the joy. I promised we would get back to how you prepare for interviews, and then I added to that and also fact-checking. So I am interested in some of the things that you do in terms of your preparation for interviews.
I look at it like in a lawyer. There's a saying about how you should never ask a witness a question you don't know the answer to. And I sort of subscribe to that method. I want to know the answer before I ask the question in an interview. And so what that means is it's a ton of research. And I'll have all kinds of papers in front of me, and I'll have Post-it notes, and I'll say this is document A, and this goes to point A, and all that stuff, and I'll make all these notes. I typically actually do not write the questions out in advance because you have a fear. There's a risk when you write questions in advance as a journalist that you'll be so focused on this question that I have on the piece of paper that when your interview subject says, yes, I stole the nuclear codes, you'll be like, okay, but so how's your wife doing? You'll be so committed to the next question, you won't hear the bombshell in front of you.
Right.
If I had been so committed to the next question at NCIS, I would never have heard her say, I apologize. And so I do a ton of research, but in the moment, you have to listen. And unfortunately, a lot of newer journalists, they are so nervous that there will be silence after an answer, that they are looking at their notes, they're committed to the questions that they've written down. And I like to be so prepared that off the top of my head, I know when someone has said something surprising. I know when someone has said something like the apology that is going in a different direction. I had all these notes, Michael, and all these outlines of where I wanted to go with that interview with her. But the moment she said she was sorry, boom, that goes out the window. My whole outline, my whole direction that I wanted to go, you have to respond in that moment. Yeah. And so it is important that you prepare. It's important that I not be caught off guard. There was a congressman who told me once I was going to interview him, and he said, what do you know about me? And I said all this stuff. And I said, then I turned it on him. I said, what do you know about, this is before we were recording. And I asked him, I said, what do you know about me? And he goes, oh, I know you're one of the best prepared journalists ever. And I'm not going to sneak anything by you. And that was a massive compliment.
Yeah. Yeah, that is. It's. I guess I'm thinking about my method to prepare for an interview, and you saw I have an intake form that I have you fill out. You didn't fill it out as much as I sometimes would like, but I do a little research. I went to your website and go online and find some things. But that's how I kind of do my research, because I'm not a reporter, so I don't go digging into your life outside of what I'm able to find. But one of the things that I do is I don't like to read that intake form or do any type of research on my guest pretty much until day of. And I do that because I want it to be fresh and I want to be present with you in that moment. So I'm not interviewing people based off of like what happened in a war. So, it's more about their life story. And so that's part of my preparation. I'm curious as to what you think about that preparation, because some people have challenged it of like, you don't think about your guest the whole week or the month or whatever. And I'm like, I interview 2 guests a week, both on Fridays. You normally have an 11 o'clock and a 2 o'clock. And I'm like, if I'm going to confuse them quite personally. I feel like if I start prepping for both my guests on a Monday, I'm going to confuse you two.
Look, I write notes by hand on a notebook, and other people are like, why don't you type them out? And so if you want to do your research on the day of the interview, and I want to do my research a month prior, hey, more power to you. Whatever works for you. And you have been present. I can testify to that. I felt like you were present for this interview. So no, don't change it up. Whatever works for you, whatever your research method is, whatever makes you feel confident and prepared, that's what you should do.
Yeah. And then the other one I appreciate that you said too is about the prepared questions. That's another one. I actually get a lot of feedback from podcast guests about that, where they go to podcasts and the host has so many prepared questions that, to your point, they don't hear the story. And I've been fortunate to have some really wonderful guests on that have provided me with the feedback of, it was nice to not like get bombarded with questions. Like, although I'm asking you a bunch of questions during this whole time, it just pertains to what we're talking about. And I think that in journalism, you're on television and you have a half-hour spot or a 15-minute spot, or maybe you have an hour or whatever it is, but it's usually not long because our attention span's not long. And so you have to get certain questions out. So I get that. But in the podcast realm, it's like, you don't need to go boom, 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 boom. Like, you could listen a little bit, right?
I mean, it feels like we're having a conversation. Now, I'm very disappointed that you haven't asked me about my first stint on national television. That is really, you're missing the lead story here. When I was 18, are you going to ask me about my nationwide debut?
Hold on, because I want to showcase my research here. Okay. And so for all of our listeners, what he's speaking about, if he's going to kick me if I'm wrong here, what he's speaking about is there's a little show on television, and it's called The Price is Right. And I'm going to just make an assumption here.
I'll fact check it.
That you'll fact check it, and hopefully you don't kick me for the name of the person I put on this. But there's a little show called The Price is Right. And your claim to celebrity was being chosen to meet Bob Barker on The Price is Right. And I'll let you take the rest from there.
So I went as a freshman in college, and I had always watched The Price is Right. When you're sick, you're home.
My wife loves that show today.
Okay, so Drew Carey, back then it was Bob Barker and the late Rod Roddy as the announcer. And so I had just marched in the Rose Parade a couple of days prior. We were going to go. My whole dorm was going to go, and I wasn't going to go. And my mom's like, "You're crazy." You see how my mom is always like the font of wisdom here in my life. And she said, "You're crazy. You've always watched The Price is Right. You want to go? Okay, fine, go." So
she's very encouraging.
She's very encouraging, right? Hi, Mom. And what most people don't realize is that you're interviewed when you go to The Price is Right. You're interviewed in groups of 10. And so you go in front of 2 producers, and they're on director's chairs, and I was with a group of 25 people from USC. So you walk up in a group, and there were 10 of us, and I was number 9 of 10. So the producer starts on my right with number 1, and he says, "Just tell me what your name and major is. What your name was." We go down the line. And I'm looking at this line, Michael, and they're saying, "Oh, I'm so-and-so, and this is my major." And I'm thinking, how in the world am I going to get on The Price is Right if all I say is I'm Mark and I'm a broadcast journalism major? That's going to get me nowhere. So they get to me and I go nuts and I say, "I'm Mark and I'm a broadcast journalism major and I play alto saxophone in the greatest marching band in the history of the world, USC, and we're going to beat the UCLA Trojans, we're going to beat the Notre Dame Irish," and I go off.
You did what most people do when they get up on stage with them, right?
Right. This wasn't even on stage. This was like outside.
Yep.
And so we get done with that and all my friends are like, "You blew it. You blew it. You were crazy. You were over the top energetic. You're never going to get picked." I'm like, okay, well, I ruined my shot here, right? So we get in the studio, and they tell you that if you can't hear Rod Roddy because of the music, they will hold up a cue card with the name of the person they call. Well, I'm not paying attention. So the game show starts, and the music starts, and you know how they pick 4 people in the beginning of the game show, right, to fill contestants' row. So they call number 1. I'm not paying attention. Oh, I'm clapping. I'm looking around, blah, blah, blah. Finally, they get to number 4, and I get poked in the ribs by the person, my classmate on the right, and I ignore them. And then I'm poked in the ribs on the left. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he points. And it's that slow motion in your life where you follow his arm and the finger where he's pointing. And he's pointing at the stage, and I can see a cue card, and it says, Mark Albert. I'm like, oh my God. So if you watch the tape of the video, like they can't find me.
I tried to find the tape, actually.
I hid it. It's under lock and key. Remember the transparency? It doesn't apply here. So anyways, long story short, I get down to contestants row. I finally get on stage. Bob and I have this whole back and forth about USC. Cool. And anyways, I win the whole thing. So I win the prize.
That's what I was waiting for you to get to, the Showcase Showdown. What was it?
Yeah, so the first Showcase Showdown was like a living room and, a boat and all this. I'm a freshman.
Right.
What am I going to do with a living room set and a boat?
And what do you know about it?
I don't know about anything. And so I pass it to the Maria, I think was her name, next to me, and I go for the next one. The next one was a recliner, and it was a hot tub, and it was a Camaro, T-top RS Camaro, and I didn't have a car, and I was 18, so I thought I died and went to heaven.
We're going to play with you. Hold on. We're going to play with you. So we have a recliner.
Yeah, the recliner.
What year is this?
This was 1996.
1996. Yeah. Recliner,
okay. A hot tub, and a Camaro, T-top Camaro RS.
T-top Camaro RS, and this is 1996.
Yeah, 96.
1996. All right, let's see. I'm going 20 at 96. I'm going to go 22K on the Camaro. I'm going to go I'm going to go 1,100 on the hot tub, and the recliner I'm going to go 200. So what do we got there? We got 22, 20, 23. Did I say 1,100? Right. So 33, 30, 37. I'm going to go with 37,000.
So you're making a faulty assumption here that I actually remember what that was. So listen, the total prize package I won was $32,000.
Oh, it was close.
No, but for everything. Because I won an antique trunk to get on stage, and then I won a refrigerator, a tea set, binoculars, a telescope, and a sofa, which I still own. And
wow.
Yes, Francisco here hates the sofa, but I still own the sofa. And then the whole Showcase Showdown. So the whole package was $32,000. I think the showcase was like $23,000.
Okay, all right.
Remember, this was long time ago.
Yeah, what did I say? 30? I said 36.
Yeah, long time
37.
ago. Yeah,
all right.
So you were close for the total package.
You're saying I'm making an assumption that you remember the price. You remembered every single item you won. I think that's weirder. The price is easy.
Okay, let me tell you why. I have told this story probably 5,000 times in my life, at least. And when I won, it was before social media. Walking around campus, people recognized me and stopped me for years later.
That's so cool.
Because they saw it on TV. It aired at 10 a.m.
And my last question about The Price is Right, and we're going to get back to self-development here, people, because this is what it's all about. It's all about learning things. But this is the cool part. This is what's so cool about meeting people with unique stories and really diving into it. And I think it's really a lesson for everybody to hear, is that there's more to someone than what they show. And, if I met you and I said, hey, you're a journalist, I want to learn about journalism, and I want to learn about cameras and all this other stuff, and I only want to talk to you about what you're doing in your career and being on CBS, you'd be like, cool, Michael, but I don't know if I want to come up from D.C. to talk about that, which I do all the time, right? But this is really about getting to know somebody for who they are. But anyway, so my little rant there. I am interested, one last question about The Price is Right, and because they're pretty famous for this, what T-shirt did you wear? Did you guys have a team T-shirt?
We didn't have a team T-shirt. We all wore USC shirts.
You did?
And I still have the shirt because my mom made me keep it.
Okay.
Here's my mom again. And can I just go back to something you just said?
Yeah.
Steve Hartman is a correspondent at CBS News. He is one of the most phenomenal writers in America. He does a story every Friday night on the CBS Evening News, Steve Hartman. I hope you're listening, Steve. And he used to do a series called Everybody Has a Story. He would have a map of the United States. He would close his eyes, and he would put his finger down on the map. And wherever his finger landed is where they would do a story from the following week. He would go to that town, he would open up the yellow pages, and he would do it again and put his finger on the yellow pages and find some random person. And he would find the most incredible, emotional, impactful, poignant story you would ever heard of these people. So what you're saying is true. Everybody has a story. You just have to dig.
Yeah. I really believe that when I think about this show and why I started it and how it's evolved and where it's gone. And I always look at it and I go, you might be the star of the celebrity of the show, but I always think everybody's got a story. And I don't think I'd ever deny anybody a request to come on the show, because to that point, some people, they're a little bit more shy. They're not as easy to open up about their story, but they have a story. They have something to tell. And with everybody listening, what I always tell my guest is, as long as you impact one life, you come on here and you impact one life, your story, the way it relates to somebody listening right now, or in a clip of it, or whatever it is, that it impacted their life, that's the goal of my show, is that you impact somebody positively and that they see that there's no blueprint to what we do in life. There's, as you said, with me in journalism and interviewing, and there's what works for you, and everybody is different. And when I first started this show, initially, just for some backdrop to what I'm saying here, I thought that there was a blueprint. And so the purpose of this show for me was to learn the blueprint. It was to interview CEOs, business owners, entrepreneurs, business leaders, to learn the blueprint, to find out, get all of you here to give me your information based off of my questions, that I would ask you questions that I have every desire to learn about, right? How do I start a business? How do I become a leader? How do I do all these things? And what I learned, your episode 119, I believe today, as we sit here, what I've learned is that there's nobody, the most successful people that have walked through these doors, has the same story.
My story is not your story, and it shouldn't be.
Right.
Just because there are best practices doesn't mean you have to follow each individual person's path. And so what works for you doesn't necessarily work for me. You should do what works for you.
I think that that's just phenomenal and amazing. And so getting to best practices. So we're gonna jump off of this for a second. By the way, I had a little celebrity myself. When I was 9 years old. Now, you don't like liars, but you're gonna forgive me for this one here. You're gonna forgive me for this one here.
Yeah.
When I was 9 years old, there was a show on TV called Video Arcade, and I was in the YMCA camp, and they took us to see Video Arcade. So we went to see it. Television show. It was in the 90s. It was a show about video games. And Johnny Arcade was the big host, and all my friends knew who he was. I didn't know who he was because I didn't watch the show. But anyway, I'm there and I'm excited because I get excited very easily. And they come around with a clipboard and they say, we're looking for contestants for the next show. And so I said, I want to be on the show. And they said, well, you have to be 10 years old. And I said, well, I'm 10 years old. And so I put my name on it and everything. And sure enough, I got selected to be on Video Arcade. And I do remember being in the schoolyard. I was probably fourth grade or something like that, third or fourth grade. I remember being in the schoolyard and a couple older kids coming up to me and go, I saw you on TV. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, you were on Video Arcade. I was like, cool.
Wow.
I was like, I never saw it. I never saw it up until recently when I found it on YouTube. I found it. It's now posted on my YouTube channel because I was like, that's pretty cool. I finally found it. And I played Battletoads. I lost. I was off really quick. And I won Heavy Shredding. So I also remember a little moment there.
So you were on television 9 years before I was there.
Whoa.
When you were 9 and I was 18, right? I didn't make it till 18. You made it already when you were 9.
At 9 years old. But then it stopped there for a little while. Anyway, this is about you. I want to get to what you're doing today.
Great.
And you mentioned best practices. The way that we met is we met through Speaker Lab, which is a place where people learn about the speaking business and learn about how to turn this thing that we do well, this gift that we have of being able to speak and speak publicly and turn it into a true business and being able to book podcasts, TV shows, speaking engagements, being on stage, creating an impact with our voice. And that's how we met. And you shared some of that with me about what you're doing and how you're trying to create this impact. And the best practices is really a great way to go into this, in that you're doing media training and strategic planning and all these different cool things in media. And so I would love if you could share some more about what you're doing today in this space.
Well, thanks. I took a sabbatical from journalism in fall of 2023. And because, 25 years is a quarter century. So, as you can see with the gray hair, time to do something a little bit different.
At least you still have hair.
That's true. And so I launched Media Advisory Experts to do media training for executives and companies, organizations, thought leaders, anyone who might be interviewed by the media or who needs to work on their public speaking and their public presence. And then we also do journalism training, which I've done since 2016. And we do crisis communications and video production as well. And so I just gave a talk actually a week before we're sitting here taping. And one of the most pressing, revolutionary things I try to get leaders to focus on is I tell them, ask yourself if this is you. Are you sending out lots and lots of news releases, maybe 250 news releases with the help of an expensive, fancy PR firm, and all you're hearing in return is silence? Silence. Is nobody calling?
Right.
Then I want you to do something counterintuitive. And I want you to stop pitching your company. And I want you to stop pitching your product and stop pitching your brand. Instead, I want you to pivot 180 degrees. And I want you to pitch your expertise. What value are you going to add to the audience? What value are you going to add to that journalist who's writing that story? If you try to sell your product, your company, your brand through a journalist, they're going to sniff that out in a heartbeat and you're done. Toast, put a fork in you. Instead, what I tell my clients is let's find that expertise that you have, because if you're a thought leader, an executive, realtor, banker, financial advisor, doctor, you have expertise. Let's find what that expertise is. Let's craft it into a compelling story pitch. And let's target who you're going to be sending that pitch to. Stop sending out news releases about your company. It's foolish. And yet everybody does it every day. And they wonder why they don't get results. So my media training focuses on let's find your expertise. Let's craft your story and pitch. Let's find out who it should go to. And I want you to add value to that journalist and that story. And that's the heart of what we do. We're not a PR firm. We help you maximize your PR opportunities.
I have a good friend who has been on the podcast, Tom Langan, and he always says it: lead with value, lead with value, lead with value. I'm interested in this shift in media about leading with value, because it's a shift. It really is. Like growing up, it was all about pitching your product, pitching what you do, and it was all about that. That's what the commercials were. And in today's media, we see a lot of what you're talking about, thought leader. Like when I see people like a Gary Vee or even Neil deGrasse Tyson or something like that, and you see that and they're talking and they're thought leaders, they're coming across as thought leaders, but behind them, they're selling something. There's a book for sale, there is a media company, whatever there is, there's something. And I mean, very similar to in our business of public speaking, we're on stage, we're speaking, we're trying to create an impact, but we also have something that we're selling. And we're leading with value. We're no longer getting on stage saying, hey, buy my book or buy my course. We're teaching them something. And so I'm interested in if you know when this shift happened and why it happened, from going from product pitching into leading with value.
So I'm actually going to differ with you just a little bit if I can here. So what you're saying, in my view, are two separate things. So product pitching has existed for a very long time. The pivot in product pitching came with social media, with influencers and trying to subtly get your product placement in there. You've seen it more and more in the Super Bowl ads or in movies, right? Yep. Where you see the star is in the BMW, and they don't ever say the word BMW, but you see the car prominently in the movie. That's because BMW likely paid for it, right?
Yep.
I'm arguing that...
Product placement, that is, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
What I'm arguing, though, is that is different than what I'm talking about in journalism and in the news. Here's an example. Katie Couric's first husband died of colon cancer. 2 years later, she did something incredibly brave. And she got a colonoscopy live on the air on the Today Show, which at the time was the #1 morning news program in America. Can you imagine? I'm now at an age where I just had my first one, and let me tell you, no cameras were allowed. So she did this, incredibly brave. Years later, she went with Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Kimmel got it on TV as well. If I was a doctor who did colonoscopies, I would see that this was going to be happening on Thursday, and let's say it's Monday, and I would draft an email that says, top 3 symptoms to look for that I might have colon cancer, top 5 ways to prevent colon cancer. And then I would send that to my local media, the TV stations, the newspapers, the radios, etc. I'm not sending a news release. I'm saying, here is my expertise, and here's the value I'm going to give to your audiences. Then, when the local news has you on, right, because we call this a breakout piece. Here's the national news, and of course you're wondering about colon cancer, so let's have an expert on. Here's the expert, the doctor that does colonoscopies. Of course, they're going to mention your company. They're going to put it on the lower third banner at the bottom of the screen. They're going to mention it in the introduction, but you're not wrapping the interview around your company or your brand or your product. You're not getting 10% off a colonoscopy if you use the word Kirk, right? Instead, you're pitching your expertise and the value that you're bringing to your audience. And I would argue that that's been the way to get the attention for a journalist for decades.
Okay.
To add value. But so many people today are misinformed and think that they're going to send out to an investigative journalist the top sunscreen for summer. I don't care what the top sunscreen brands are for summer. You're doing it wrong. So if you are blatantly pitching your product, your company, your brand, and you're not getting media coverage, you're doing it wrong. If you're not engaging the media, you're afraid of the media, you're doing it wrong. So what we help people do is find out what their expertise is, how best to pitch it to a journalist, and what value we can add to that journalist's audience.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying all of that for us. Product placement, I remember learning that one in my film classes. And now it's probably, my wife probably wants to kill me every time I mention, oh, you see that, and I mention all the product. I mean, you look at a Michael Bay movie and it's like filled with product placement. It's just crazy. Going back to what we were just talking about in terms of what you offer, you're also offering media training, which is interesting to me because I think sometimes that some of my guests need some media training because they do come on trying.
Where's my card? Michael, let me get you my card.
Trying to pitch a product, but I know that very quickly once we start having a nice conversation, they're able to move past that. Where I'm going with this is you did have a really big celebrity guest. Now this is pre you opening your business. You did have a big celebrity guest, and that was Bill Gates. You had interviewed him. Yeah, I'm interested. Twice, yeah. I'm interested in the media training that goes into someone like that. And does he receive media training? Is he past that? Do you offer it to him before he comes on? Like, do you help him understand, like, hey, this is how you're being perceived, or maybe you should sit differently, or something like that? I mention that because he slouches when he sits. So I'm just interested on when you work with a guest like that, how do you go ahead and?
Sure. So this is actually a great point for your audience. It would be unethical for me as the journalist interviewing Bill Gates to give him media training. So the way that someone comes into
I might be misunderstanding media training then too.
Yeah. So here's what I mean by it. So let's say I'm interviewing Bill Gates. Mm-hmm. It's not adversarial, but I'm not his friend either. And so obviously I have a point that I want to get in the interview. I have questions I want to ask, and he has a point for granting me the interview. The first time I interviewed him, it happened to be that he used to do before the pandemic only 3 interviews a year, and it was around the annual letter that he and Melinda Gates, now separated, put out. And so he chose us because of my work on election security. He was admiring of it. He wanted me to be one of his 3 interviews that year. So he wanted to get his annual report and his priorities out in the first time we interviewed. The second time I interviewed him was about COVID and the support he was giving to those trying to develop the mRNA vaccines. And so in that role as a journalist, you cannot coach the person. That would be highly unethical. In my role now that I've taken my sabbatical for journalism, we would take someone like Bill Gates or someone who's a business leader, let's say a tech startup CEO. They're so focused on Series A funding and the technology and all this. The last thing they're thinking about is media training. But when they're about to go public or when they're trying to pitch investors, they need those concepts involved in media training. How to present, how to be on camera, how to pivot, how to develop your messages and make sure they get through those interviews. And sometimes how to handle a hostile interview or hostile questions. That's the media training I do now, and I can give them insight that very few PR firms can, which is I spent 25 years as a journalist. I know how a journalist thinks. I've done it, and I can tell you the pitfalls to look out for and how journalists can be an amazing resource for the value that you want to add to the audience. But I'm not giving Bill Gates tips, whether he needs them or not. That's not my role.
Right, and not your role as the journalist.
As a journalist.
Which makes sense to me now.
If Bill's listening, Bill, give me a call. You know me.
Anytime,
you trust
right?
me anytime.
That makes more sense now, because as a journalist, you are looking for the truth. And therefore, you're not going to try to get him to say, or her say it any way that's going to dissuade from the truth. That makes a lot more sense to me now. But now, because of your business and you're more of an objective person, you're not the journalist in this case, you can give that to them if they are your client. That makes sense. Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so I'm working with a variety of clients right now, and each client has different needs. Some are organizations, some are people, some are CEO, whatever. And though everybody's needs are different, we want to let them know what a journalist is going to be looking for and what not to do. Mm-hmm. Don't lie to the journalist. It seems simple, but there's a lot of theory that goes behind that and a lot we need to practice. So one of the things I love to do is we do sort of a classroom session on paper, but then I bring in a camera crew, lights, multiple cameras, and we sit you down and we see how are you going to be on camera. And I throw you some curveballs. Sometimes I will pay for opposition research on you without you knowing so that I can throw those curveballs to you in our mock interview. And then we watch it back on camera and we find out what your tics are, what your problems are, what we need to work on, and then we do it again. And for many of these people, it's the first time they've ever done this. Trust me, you don't want the first time that you've done it to be for real. And that's why you need people to do media training.
That's so cool. I'm grinning from ear to ear while you say that, because I've had that experience in the podcast studio. My very first time here at iHeart was oh my goodness, it was back in 2000, like I think 19. So this is right now we're recording this as 2024.
Congratulations on 5 years.
Well, hold the congratulations, because I've only been recording for 3 years. So I had been brought in by a friend to record my first podcast. And we were going to see how it goes. And so I showed up here, and I've taken public speaking classes in college. I've theater, all this stuff, right? Like I've always been open, and you right now, right? We're just talking, right? Well, my very first time here in iHeart was in a studio next door here. And I sit down, and he goes, yeah, just grab a seat right over there. And he's on the boards, like real confidently. He's been on radio for years. And he's like, yeah, we're going to just start recording your first podcast, see how you do, see how it feels and all that. And I'll go, okay. And I sit down, and I'm nervous, and I don't know what to say. I don't know, how do I speak into the mic? And I've just like approached the mic just awkwardly just now, everyone. And that's what I did, was like I didn't know where it should go or what it should do or where I should be. And he started warming me up. He started saying, so tell me about your family. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about your life. Whatever it is, right? He started getting me talking. I bring this up in what you're talking about in media training, because even I, as an extrovert, even I, as someone who knew I wanted to do this, who has been on camera and all this other stuff, was nervous in this situation. And it took me time to get comfortable to where I'm sitting here with you. And I'm not saying I'm totally comfortable. There's some nerves kicking in here. I'm sure anybody who's been listening to my shows can hear that from me. But my point is like, it's taken time. So 100%, I'm with you on this, is that if you're going to be interviewed by anybody, and you haven't been on camera yet, you need to get on camera. You need to get behind it. And I'm not just saying that to pitch you or anything that you offer there. I've experienced it. And it's so, so true.
Well, you don't have to pitch it. I will. MediaAdvisoryExperts.com. MediaAdvisoryExperts.com.
He's pitching. He's all there. I'm going to switch gears real quick as we start concluding, but it's only because with the work that you've done, and where we are right now in terms of elections and everything, I think is very important to bring up. And you based off of our conversations and getting to know you, you really dig deep to the root of things, and you have a very objective personality. And so that's why I feel comfortable to ask you this. But I am interested, you did this whole several part series on elections.
24 part.
24. I knew it was a big one, yeah, on election security. And so I'm interested in what that was about and what came up about it. If you could just share a little bit about this series.
Sure. When I created the first national investigative unit for Hearst Communications in 2018, one of the very first stories I pitched, I'm talking within 72 hours of starting at Hearst, was election security. This was 2018, long before all the controversy that we've seen in 2020 and since. And we did a series about, can you hack voting machines? And I'll give you the bottom line. Yes, you can absolutely hack a voting machine. However, it's going to take you about 30 seconds to a minute per voting machine. And there are about 100,000 voting machines in America. It's impossible to hack America's voting system. You can hack one machine, if you can get it, alone, with a USB drive, by yourself, with no one interacting with you. Impossible. You cannot swing an American election like that. It's bogus. Anyone who tells you that space lasers or anything else.
Space lasers.
That was a real thing that somebody mentioned.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Some of your audience will know what I'm talking about. Anybody who says that you can flip votes in voting machines in mass is bonkers. It cannot be done. And we have it on video of changing the race, but on one machine, and we time how long it took, and we tell you exactly what you need to do it, and it's impossible to do nationwide. So we did a 24-part series on disinformation, misinformation, how not to be duped, the whole thing. Problems with the post office in 2020 about mail-in ballots and all that stuff. And you know what I came away with after 24 parts and interviewing almost all of the secretaries of state in America that run elections? I interview them twice a year for 5 years. Is that there is no widespread fraud in America. It doesn't exist. And anybody who tells you otherwise, Michael, is lying to you because they think you're a dupe. There is no widespread fraud. America's elections are safe and secure. Is there fraud? Absolutely. It happens every election, 1 here, 2 there, 3 there. There is no widespread fraud in America's election system, period.
Widespread being the key word there. This has been awesome having you on. And when I conclude, I like to go to someone's mantra or inspirational quote that moves them forward in their lives and what it means to them. And for you, it says, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, no matter how measured or far away.
Henry David Thoreau.
Yeah. Tell us about that quote.
It's actually hanging on my wall in my bedroom. My mother had that photo, the framed poem, and she gave it to me when I was a kid because sometimes I wanted to do things that were different, and I didn't go with the pack. And we were talking earlier about sometimes I've quit my job without a job because I wanted to go find the joy. I wanted to chase the joy. And that line, that poem has resonated with me so deeply in my life. It has almost been not just a mantra, but a theme. It's okay if you don't follow the path that everyone else is on. And it's okay if you don't follow the pack. You should chase your joy. And I have looked to that quote, that line from Thoreau, that poem for sustenance and guidance and comfort, because it can be lonely when you take the path less traveled. It can be very lonely. But you know what? Sometimes you hear a tune and you have to follow it. And I would not have followed my tunes without my teachers, without my parents, without the people who have made a difference in my life, who have given me the confidence to follow that path, no matter how measured or distant the music may be. And so that line from Thoreau has been very impactful in my life. I mean, ever since I was, a young boy. And it's funny that you mentioned it because I actually was going to bring it up if you didn't, because it is that impactful to me. And I think that a lot of people these days, especially with social media, if I don't have 1 million likes, I'm not worth anything. Or my life doesn't matter because it hasn't resonated on TikTok. Forget that stuff. You follow your joy and you follow the music no matter how measured or far away it may be. And don't worry about if anyone else is on the same path.
I don't have any other way to end this other than that was awesome. I am so appreciative of you coming to studio today, of your partner coming to the studio today, and it's just been. It's really just such a pleasure to have you right here in studio. Like I said, as a basketball fan, a little childhood dream was to make it to the NBA, and I knew that very quickly that was never going to happen. So we shifted gears, and so if LeBron James would be my NBA, you're here as my journalist. So it's really, really such an honor to have you in studio, and I'm very appreciative of it. I look forward to getting on stages with you and speaking with you in the future. I would love for our audio listeners, of course, this will all be in the show notes, if you could just share with them again your handle, how to get in touch with you, and your website on how to get in touch with you.
Sure. On Twitter, Instagram, it's Malbert News, Albert News. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. And for all of your media training, journalism training, crisis communications, or video production needs, it's mediaadvisoryexperts.com. Mediaadvisoryexperts.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast. Thank you again to our sponsor, Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. That's DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. This episode was produced by Uncle Mike at the iHeart Studios in Poughkeepsie. Special thanks to Lara Rodrian for the opportunity and my team at Michael Esposito Inc.